Last we left off, we were discussing.
Yes.
Oh, we made it to Fria, eh?
Oh, yeah, we did.
Fantastico. So we were talking about potatoes and how they changed everything. So we finish this? Cool. Alright. On to La Tierra Helada, the frozen land. Frozen, yeah. They're singing Let It Go all the time.
Are you recording us?
Yeah.
Well,
He's like, I was letting this go. It's fantastic.
hey.
You're welcome. Yeah. I'm saving it for posterity. You guys know how amazing this would have been for historians 100 years ago?
Yeah.
They had this kind of stuff. They'd be like, we know all kinds of stuff. Now, historians 600 years from now will be able to listen to you guys and be like, yeah, that's what was going on in presentation again.
They're going to be like, we'll just skip.
Nothing of noteworthiness. So yeah, don't be a drum llama. Yeah. Basically, that's the thing about La Tierra. Nothing really grows there except grass. And as you guys know, you can't eat grass. You just make it grow up. So that's instead, we have animals eat grass. Yeah, and they take that and they make it into tasty, tasty animal parts for the eat. Convert that into meats that we then eat, and everything's fantastic. And if you notice, that's where animals tend to be grazing, is big grasslands, things like that. So the fact is that it's a way of using the land effectively, which brings us to one of the biggest concerns facing any nation is, do they develop or do they preserve their natural resources? Preservation means it's going to be there for later generations. You know, generally speaking, there's some pretty nice things out there for us to preserve. I mean, great natural parks. I mean, you guys have ever done the natural parks tours around the United States, but it's kind of amazing, really. But on the other hand, if you preserve it, you can't use it. And frankly, you need to use resources to develop your economy. So it's easier for an economy that's already developed to kind of shift away from more harmful technologies and sort of use more green technologies. And one that's still up and coming is a lot more expensive to do that, and so they tend to not, which is why if you look at developing nations, they can have way bigger problems with pollution than developed nations. So again, very bottom, you have La Tierra Caliente, you move up to La Tierra Templada, then you move up La Tierra Fria, and then La Tierra Helada. Okay? Fantastic. Moving on. Let's talk agriculture, farming, all that good stuff. Farming is the number one economic activity in Latin America. Now, of course, it depends on where you are. That's always the case. But a lot of people still make a living through farming. And the issue that we have with farming is, well, there are multitudinous. The first issue has to do with farming in the rainforest. As you guys know, the Amazon basin got a lot of rainforest in it. So when you farm there, you think, hey, there's big trees, it's got to be great farmland. Except it's not, because it does something a lot in the rainforest. I wonder what that would be. Rains. Yeah. You know what happens whenever you run water through soil? Well, it does that too, you're correct, of course. But also, a lot of minerals that plants crave.
What is it?
Gatorade, it's got what plants have drawn to it. It's got what plants crave. Idiocracy. Anyways, a lot of these nutrients, minerals are water soluble, which means when it rains, it washes away the nutrients. So if you try to grow anything there, it won't. It won't grow. It'll die. This is actually why, I don't know if anyone's aware of this, if anyone feeds a plant, you have to repot them, right? Not just because they get bigger, but because the soil get leached of all its nutrients and it dies. So a lot of people don't do that, which is why plants die, and we're like, why is it dying? I was living with water and everything.
What is the plant pot in the same pot for 5 years? It's still okay.
Well, some are less, how should I say, invasive than others. Like African violet's, oh man, it's like repotting like 4 times a year. Anyways, but back to it. So leaching is the process by which water takes out all the nutrients and minerals. So how do you reintroduce those to, say, dirt in the middle of the rainforest? Well, traditionally you use ash. Ash, burnt up plant matter, provides a lot of nutrients. So this developed a technique, or this was a technique of farming, I should say, called slash and burn farming, where you can clear a whole bunch of land by cutting down all the trees and bushes and everything, setting it all on fire. Then reintroduce those ashes to the soil. You've got some nice nutritious soil for a while. Then leaching sets in, and you have a choice. Either A, you start using artificial fertilizers, which often are toxic. Because if you think about it, what's good for plants ain't necessarily good for people or animals. And it's leaching, so it's getting into the hydrologic cycle, meaning it's getting into drinking water and killing people. Well, animals at least. And so the alternative is you clear more rainforest land and start the whole thing over again, thus having mass deforestation. It's not really a winning situation here.
You can die.
Yeah, that's, but, you know, the way that's kind of life in general. You know, something else has to die for something else to live. You know, that's basically food, right? Oh, we're sad now. Sometimes it's quite all serious and like realistic for a second. Anyways, but this is the thing, right, is how they're developing land here. And there's other farming techniques as well I want to talk about. But the answer is how do they solve this problem? No. It's still a problem. This is what we talk about, the need for sustainable development. It's development, but you're not using your resources to the point where they disappear or polluting so much that it's irreplaceable. So you're trying to do it slowly and easily and gently, but that's not always cheap or easy or even accessible. So these are problems, yes? This is what slash and burn farming looks like, in essence. Yeah, cutting that already. So it's the number one cause of deforestation in the Amazon. So it is a major problem. Now, wait.
Question.
Answer.
Okay. So you were saying that they can't grow because it's bird, but weren't trees?
Well, over time. Yeah, you're right. First of all, have you ever looked at the root system of trees? Like actually kind of track them, maybe the biology students, pretty cool. They actually go really deep. Like it's actually quite staggering how some like tap roots, how low they can go. If you're talking about like crops, their roots aren't really that deep. You can unroot branches pulling them, right? So we're talking about depth here. And remember, water, part of the hydrologic table, it stays within a certain level. So trees are fine. They can get down to the nutrients, no problem. But crops are really. Plus also, it's a lot more exposed whenever you don't have trees there. This is actually one of the issues, if you talked about erosion earlier, it's another issue because you don't have all this stuff kind of as an interlocked web of stuff. But that's the thing about rainforests, is they're actually a sustained biosphere, so everything kind of is contained. But you start taking stuff out and suddenly everything dies. So that's the concern. Now, another thing we're going to talk about, though, is terrace farming, right? So, how many of you guys have you ever looked at or studied the city of Machu Picchu? The Incan city in the Andes, right? Well, it's all over to say they had a city in the mountain. That's amazing. How do they eat? How do they farm up there?
Terrace farming.
Not terrorist farming, mind you, terraced farming. This is what terrace farming looks like. They cut these little step indentations, and I say little. See those two little spots right there? Those are people.
Wait.
They're really big. And each one of those steps is like 20 feet long.
How do they cut them? They didn't have like
With hand tools.
Jesus.
Isn't that like insane, like crazy impressive?
That takes a lot of patience.
Nah, not really slave labor. It's more like, survival. Although they might have had some of that. I'm not entirely certain, to be perfectly honest. I mean, it would not surprise me. Though the other thing is that we sometimes. Okay, let me tell you this. We are really good at convincing ourselves we can't do stuff. Right? That is something we are exceptional at, and that prevents us from doing all kinds of things. I'm not saying anything is possible, everything is possible, but there's a lot more that's possible than isn't. You start thinking about some of the asinine crap that had to happen to you people in space, it's just like mind-blowing. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, we already do that, but that's fine, I mean, just taking the moisture and stuff, no big deal. But I mean, it's like, we're talking about this all kinds of, like, if your calculations are wrong, everyone dies, we did it, because why not? Do whatever, it's all good. Dedication, man. But I've also seen stuff like, when someone really cares about something, they can do all kinds of insane stuff. Like the dude who made Middle Earth in Minecraft. Like all of it.
What's Middle Earth?
That's from Lord of the Rings. So all Lord of the Rings movies, everything, and it was just like, oh my god, like every stone was placed by hand. It's like, holy crap. It took years for this guy to do it. Yeah, but it was his hobby, is what he did, whatever.
Wait, that takes a lot of patience too.
He does. This guy built all of Middle Earth in Minecraft. And there's all kinds of weird stuff that people do, when they're passionate about and dedicated to it, they can do all these kinds of things, and it's like, man, human achievement, it's kind of awe-inspiring when you think about it. And of course, we spent, 300 years developing, poop and fart jokes. Whatever. Okay. Poop and fart jokes. I thought that was pretty obvious. Those have been around since forever. So anyways, we're next talking about is urbanization, right? So one of the things you have to understand is that Latin America as a region is pretty diverse in terms of its development. Like some of the countries are really heavily developed. Others are only developed in certain areas, and others are not really developed much at all. Though I will say this, the vast majority of cities are pretty good. Like if you go to some of the cities, you're going to basically not be able to tell the difference between them and like any others. Like Rio de Janeiro, other than being an older city, is pretty indistinguishable in certain areas, but other areas, it's very cool. Like, oh my god, you would believe. Then if you go to a place like Brasilia, it's relatively modern and not quite the same. Go to a place like Mexico City, it gets entirely different situation. Something like Tijuana, it depends on where you are, if anything else. Excuse me. And a large portion of this comes from the nature of development. So basically, most folks were farmers. As time has progressed and manufacturing has taken over, more and more people moved into cities. And at first, this meant that development in cities was lagging behind. So you'd have people moving into cities and there just wasn't enough houses there. So when that happens, you tend to have little kind of impromptu villages built up around various areas, and sometimes they actually become permanent parts of the city, like the favelas. In other cases, they ended up being kind of swept away and new modern housing built in places, and things kind of felt different. The point is, it's a factor as cities grow and achieve more and more development that they're going to go through some of these kind of growing pains. Now, I will say this. One of the big factors that contributed to urbanization in Latin America has been the development of latifundias. Latifundias are corporate farms that are owned by companies like Chiquita. They feed the hunger we have for tropical fruits and sugars, things like that, throughout the Western world and other places as well. And the thing is, these big corporations bought all the land from family farms that couldn't compete against the larger, more efficient corporate farms. So basically what would happen is the company would come in and buy a whole bunch of farmland, and they would retain some of the people to act as workers, called campesinos, who would work on the farm, but everyone else had to leave. So they would go to cities instead. Now, to fight back, to try to compete, some of the farms decided to work together, and instead of having everyone just farm their own land, they sort of worked together so they could all keep their land, but also produce goods more efficiently, and thus compete with the latifundias. These are called minifundias. So minifundias are groups of smaller family-owned farms. Latifundias are farms that are owned by corporations.
So
And campesinos work on latifundias. Yeah.
wait, latifundias are. So latifundias are corporations, and then however you say that
Campesinos?
are on them.
Yeah. They're workers on the farm. So they're paid a wage to work on the farm.
So the people that don't either move to the city or will work on the latifundias created minifundias to fight against latifundias?
No. They are unrelated to those two.
What?
They are unrelated in that. Like
Okay,
it's a false relationship. And they're not. Basically what happened is, if you have a corporation say, I want to buy your farm, you have one choice. Well, two choices. You sell, and now you just have to leave. It's not yours anymore. So You might get hired to work the area that was your farm, but maybe not. Otherwise, you have to go to the city. The second choice is you don't sell, but they're able to produce goods way cheaper than you are. So your only hope is to try to work with another farm forming a mini Cumbia. See what I'm saying? So that it's all about choices, I guess. Right. So campesinos, yeah. Guys working on farms. Working on latifundistas. Now this map shows actually a mini Cumbia and a latifundista side by side, and you can pretty quickly tell the difference. This right here is the latifundia. You see all the big fields, how everything is efficient and kind of set out, whereas this is kind of speckled, individual smaller farms. Right? That's the difference. So you have the smaller farms versus the bigger farms working together. Make sense? All right, another major industry in this area is tourism. Why? Because what's the weather like throughout Latin America?
Why?
It's, well, I don't know if it's hot, I mean, I guess it depends. But it's tropical, which means that it's really freaking nice. Like we're talking, it's that perfect temperature all the time.
Why did you go back to this format?
What?
Why did you go back to this format? You
Because
told
I
them like the.
Oh, I know. I want you to be better people. I know this. That's what I'm making you do it. You don't get stronger by doing what's easy. No, but the thing is, it's really nice weather. In fact, I believe, if I remember correctly, 6 of the top 10 rated beaches in the world are in Brazil. Like, they have so many nice beaches, so many places that people want to go on vacation, and that's a huge amount of money. I mean, if you think about it, tourism is a huge industry for many places. You know, for Britain, it's literally millions of dollars just people wanting to go stare at the Queen. In the case of South America, in some of the smaller islands, it can produce as much as 90% of their GDP. That's just gross domestic product. Basically, 90% of everything that they produce is tourism. Yeah.
What does it mean by great disparity?
Well, what I'm talking about there is that the difference between the type of homes that you have in sort of the rough neighborhoods, the poor areas, and the rich is pretty large. Because, it's like, for instance, look at Brazil. Brazil's economy is one of the largest in the world. I think it's, last I checked, it was 9th. It's probably different now, I don't know. But it was top 10. And yet, the average income for some people in Brazil is like some of the poorest in the world. So you've got some individuals who make so much money that they own, like, well, for instance, let me do this way. I believe if I remember correctly, it's less than 10% of the population in Brazil owns 90% of the wealth. So we're talking wealth on the scale of like our billionaires in America. I mean, there's even a group of helicopter pilots who are taxi pilots. They only carry rich people from point to point because basically they make so much money that if they're stuck an hour in traffic, they'll lose more money than just dropping a helicopter. That's the type of wealth we're talking about, right? So that's a huge income gap, right? Which is a problem. That actually that hurts an economy. It's a concern because you can't grow an economy with only a small percentage of the people owning wealth. You have to have a larger middle class, otherwise you can't grow. It's a positive feedback loop in essence. So anywho, the biggest problem with well, there's actually a couple problems with tourism. One, in order to actually have, like, you know, tourists come into your country, you have to have infrastructure. So, like, let's say you're an island and you really want to increase tourism because you got some nice beaches. Well, first and foremost, if you want a cruise ship to be able to stop by your island, you have to have a big enough harbor that it can stop, at very least offload passengers. Next, if you want people to fly, you've got to have an airport. Then you got to have hotels, which means you got to have electricity, running water, You've got to make certain you've got nice roads. You've got to develop shops and restaurants. Basically, you've got to spend a lot of money to make money. That means debt. It means borrowing money from other people so that you can build it. And sometimes they can't pay the debt back. Another problem is a lot of the big tourism companies, like let's talk sandals. I don't know if anyone's ever done a sandals cruise or vacation before, but it's like, all expenses paid, you go hang out on the beach, and it's all kind of nice and great and all that. But sandals isn't owned by companies in Latin America. They're owned by like American and British companies. I don't actually know who owns sandals anymore, but a lot of times it's Western companies that own everything, so really not that much wealth is actually going to the islands and such. So it's a concern. Great example of that, by the way, is the Olympics. Everyone was following the Olympics developing in Brazil, but oh man, it was a cluster. I mean, we're talking that they had all these great plans about how the Olympics were going to go down, and then they barely held it together. They're talking about the pool, one was green, stuff like that. I don't know if that's actually true, whether that was just like a meme or something. But
The pool actually was very green. It was a meme too. Why?
I don't know.
Did they put too much concentration? Like chlorine and stuff into it, and all the people had a chemical reaction.
So long story short, it's science is the reason. Yeah. Long story short, though, it didn't end real great. But one other thing I'll show you about income inequality, wrong direction, is this is an image of the same place from 3 different angles. So the top right, you've got this nice hotel, beaches, everything's kind of great. And on the left hand and the back side, you've got these kind of poorer areas. And they actually have a wall built in between them, so that if you're in the hotel, you can't see all the poor people.
Where is this?
This is in Brazil. I believe it's Rio.
Poor people. Hey.
The thing is that as heartless as that might seem, would you want to go on vacation where there's a whole bunch of hungry people looking at you? Not so much. So, again, there's a reason they do it, not just to be mean. Right, let's move on to region. Fun times, fun times. So the next theme we're going to be exploring, we only have about 9 minutes, so we're not going to get that far into this region.
What do we have now?
Yeah, you can tell that because it's on the screen. Everything this week.
Oh my goodness.
Location and region.
There's a place.
Is that BBC thing due on Friday? You should cut out region and make it next.
That's true. She asked when it's due. If it's not turned in, then it's turned late. You don't get one. She was asking for the software. At least that's how it's answered. Okay. So, this is Latin America again, as we're looking at, but each has different regions. So, even though Latin America is in itself a region, it would be a mistake to think that all peoples in Latin America are the same. If we were to subdivide it based upon regional groupings, we have Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, Spanish-speaking South America, and Brazil. If you notice how big is Spanish-speaking South America, it's basically all of it except Brazil. The question is, why? Well, you guys know in 1492 a dude did something. Who? Yeah, where was he from?
Portugal.
Spain.
No, he was sent by Spain.
He was. Well,
China.
Technically, I said,
he was Italian.
I'll
Now he didn't. He actually asked whether or not. I'm trying to remember where. I think he was from Genoa. He asked the Doge of Genoa whether or not he would fund his field of exploration, and the Doge said no. So then he went to Portugal, asked the King of Portugal, and he said no. Went to the King and Queen of Spain and said, Ferdinand, Isabella, yeah.
He said that he'll make them.
And they said, okay, Genoa.
I thought you said Genova. No,
Genova.
Genovia.
I really thought you
From Princess Leia?
yeah, like that's made up.
Genovia. But yeah, no, it was Genoese. But anyways, what happened was is that he couldn't get people to tell him, yeah, why?
Because they thought he was a lady. They didn't want to put
Why?
their money into something that might
It
not
makes
be.
sense when they get more like.
Because he tried before. Because
He
people,
did.
other people have tried.
So the actual reason is a little more complicated than that, because basically, I hear so many lies told to grade schoolers. Like, for instance, everyone thought the world was flat. That is not true. It's simply not true. The world is round. No one thought that it was round either. The real debate was whether or not Columbus was right about the size. Because the thing is, the main trade route to India to get spices like sugar went through Turkish lands and lands controlled by the Italians. So the Italians didn't really need another trade route, neither did the Portuguese, but the Spanish did. So they were kind of willing to hear him out, and he said, if we just sail across the Atlantic Ocean due west, we'll come around the other side and hit China. The problem is Columbus believed that Archimedes' measurement of the Earth was wrong, and that the Earth was smaller than it really is. Columbus was wrong. Archimedes was pretty close, spot on. So basically, if Columbus was wrong and the Americas hadn't existed, he would have died en route. They didn't have enough food or water to make it across the Atlantic Ocean. Remember, the only way to preserve food at that time was through basically drying it, salting it, and pickling it. So there's only so much food you can bring on a voyage with you before you run out. A lot of times what sailors would do when they were sailing long distances is they would stop on bigger continents like Africa or off of islands where they could resupply their food and water. You can't do that in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So basically, his crew was getting really nervous because they're like, dude, there's nothing here. We're going to die. He's like, no, keep on sailing. They were planning a mutiny. Like, it's like, if tomorrow we don't find land, we're going to kill Columbus and take over the ship. Say, oh, yeah, he fell overboard. Go back home and then, we won't die of starvation. But they found land on the way. So he lucked out because they're planning the next day, and there it is. But he didn't reach what he thought. In fact, no one would actually complete that voyage till years later. But here's the thing is, once they discovered new land, and most importantly, they discovered gold in the new land, suddenly there's a tremendous competition over it. So Portugal basically said that everything in the Atlantic Ocean is theirs. And Spain was basically the hell you say, and they threatened a war. Now, when I say war, I don't mean like little Spain, little Portugal like we have today. They're huge empires. We would have talked about a world war. So in order to prevent it, the Pope, who at the time was Alexander IV, stepped in and basically said, you guys chill, and literally divided the earth in half. Everything east of this line, called the line of demarcation, would go to Portugal, and everything west of it would go to Spain. Well, the amount of land that Portugal got with the original line of demarcation was like itty-bitty. So they complained, like toddlers do, your place is bigger than mine, ah! And so the Pope moved the line a year later. So in 1493, you had the line of demarcation. In 1494, you have the Treaty of Tordesillas, and thus we have South America split in half. The eastern portion, which is in Brazil, by the way, was settled by Portugal. And then the western portion, which is basically the rest of it, was settled by Spain. All of that is why you have the western portion of South America where they speak Spanish, and the east where they speak Portuguese. Okay? We're going to call that a day.
That's big.